All right, we've got a new series, A Mighty Hand, and I got that because I read the Bible to my kids growing up. That was one of the first things we would do each day, and and I would read basically kind of through the Bible until we got to like Sodom and Gomorrah, and I would say things like, "And they did ugly things," and the kids would be like, "Mom, was it really saying?" I'm like, "Ugly things." I mean, my paraphrase, it was ugly things. It made my children go start searching their Bibles because they'd be like, "This is what it really says, Andrew." So anyway, and when I would get to the place where Moses was gone to Pharaoh and everything, I would say that he would say, God's going to deliver us by a mighty hand. I did all kinds of stuff. You just had them in there. I thought it was hilarious and very entertaining. Nobody thinks I'm funnier than I do. So that's what I thought of when I started studying for this, and I thought we just need to remember a mighty hand because our God has a mighty hand, and He has not changed. The God that we see in the book of Exodus, the God we see in the book of Genesis is still God. One of the characteristics of God is His immutability, meaning He cannot change. He still moves. He moves mountains. He will do so much in our lives, in and through us, but we have to do it God's way. And we have to do it God's time. He does not serve us. We serve Him. Ask Moses. So here we go. We're going to go back to Genesis 15. I'm going to just tell you some things, and I'm going to do an overview. There's no way I could teach this line by line, so I'm just going to do a little overview. Going back to Genesis 15, 13 through 16. It's where the Lord said to Abram, he's still called Abram here, He says, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners or strangers in a land that's not theirs, and they will be servants there or slaves. They will be afflicted for 400 years. Can you imagine that prophecy over your children's children's children? They're going to be slaves for 400 years. All right. But I will bring judgment on the nation they serve, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. And as for you," he told him he's going to die at a good old age, "and they shall come back here in the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." And I want you to realize, people sometimes, I've had these questions when people start trying to serve God and trying to understand God. They're like, how could God go in and tell His people to just kill everybody in a place? It just seems cruel that they're just in there minding their own business, and God goes in and says, "I want to give this land to my people, so go in and kill them all." It sounds cruel, doesn't it? We get a clue here. He says the wickedness of the Amorites is not yet complete. That means that several hundred years later, God already knows what those Canaanite people, the Amorites, are going to be like. And He says they're wicked now. He said, but in a few hundred years, they're going to be beyond anything that can be done for them. So at the right time, when their wickedness is complete and they deserve to be judged, then I'll let you go in and take their land. So that's why they didn't take it right then. God was like, I'm going to wait till their wickedness is at the full height. And people that have done excavations of those times, I remember reading that people in that area would flay people, meaning while they were alive, peel their skin off. The wickedness of them is beyond our comprehension, and archaeological evidence ends up pointing to what we see in the Bible. So they were pretty horrific people, but God waited till it was really bad before He went in. So He tells them several things. They're going to be slaves, afflicted for 400 years. God's going to judge the nation. They're going to come out very rich, and they're slaves. They're going to be slaves, but they're going to come out rich. How unusual would that be? He said Abraham will live to be old. He lived to be 175. He said they're going to come back to the promised land, and the people there are not wicked enough to drive out. Who but God could lay out a future like that and get it 100% correct? How? God is outside of time. We've got time down here. God's outside of time. He sees everything, and He often tells us the what, but not the how. The how we have to leave up to Him, and I'll explain that a little bit in a minute. We often get way too focused on the what instead of getting to know God during the how. And the how is usually where pain and growth both are. And we are in a dreadful hurry to get to the what. I want you to think about it. God told David what he was going to be. He said, "You're going to be the king someday," right? He anoints David as a teenager. Did he tell him how he was going to become king? Did he tell him how he was going to be running from King Saul and how he was going to be scraping on a door and drooling with his beard, acting like he was crazy because he was afraid he was going to get killed? Did he tell him all that? No, he just said, you're going to be king. And you know what we usually do is like, all right, I'm going to be king. And then God's like, but at first I got to crush you to powder. He just leaves out that part because he tells you the what that's going to happen. He just doesn't tell you the how. He doesn't give you every little detail. And then we've got Joseph. Joseph has that dream that his brothers are going to bow down to him, meaning Joseph's going to be exalted to a huge position. God tells him what? Does God tell him your brothers are going to sell you to some Egyptians? You're going to be in Potiphar's house. You're going to go to jail and be falsely accused. Does he tell him all that? No. He tells him the what. He doesn't tell him the how. And what we usually want is what God wants to give us. Trying to walk out your faith in the middle of it to get there is what's hard. Would you all agree? Absolutely. I put a little song down here from Alabama. I'm in a hurry and don't know why. Oh, wait. I'm in a hurry to get things done. Oh, I rush and rush until life's no fun. All I really gotta do is, but I'm in a hurry and I feel like I'm at a concert. I should have had a microphone. It's true. I think of that when you get in a hurry just to get everything done and you don't enjoy the process. Do y'all know what I'm talking about? You just, and you're like, why can't I just not be in a hurry? All I got to do is live and die. I'm in a hurry. Don't know why. So I just stuck that song in there because I wanted to sing. Loving God and loving others is why we're on this planet. It's why the Bible's written, all the law and prophets hangs on that. And listen to this, you can't love who you don't know. Let's learn how to slow down and enjoy the process of getting to know who we're trusting instead of just trying to arrive at some imaginary place. I hear people say, I'm just trying to get there. I just want to get there. What's there? I mean, people are like, I want to get there. And what they're usually saying is, I want to get to the place where it's easy. I don't have to have any faith. I got plenty of money. The husband I want. The children are all loving Jesus and paying for their own bills. Whatever it is, we're trying to get there. And there is an imaginary place. I want y'all to know there is heaven. And we're never going to get there till we leave the earth and get to heaven. We're never going to arrive. Has anybody in here arrived yet? If you have, you need to leave immediately. Because we're all going to claw your eyes out. And life is truly meant to be a journey in fearless trust. How do we get there? By having tons of stuff come at us that absolutely scares us to death. Okay? And having God take our hands and walk us through it step by step. What happens to most people on this journey of trust and this journey that God's taken us through? What they think is, I could serve God if troubles would quit happening. Anybody ever felt that way? I mean, I'm just getting on track and everything just gets me off track. That's what people say. I just can't do it because every time I try to serve God, all hell breaks loose. And you can say hell as long as it's in a right sentence. Hopefully. If not, we'll be editing that. It's a King James cuss word or something. And what God's saying with our troubles is, I'm allowing troubles so you can have the only thing that matters, a relationship with your Creator. I tell women this a whole lot of times. They'll come to me and go, oh my goodness, this is happening. I'm all to pieces. And I'm like, this is how you get to know God. If you never have any troubles, how will you know God? Is it not true? Try to think that way. And guess what? I have to preach this to myself too, because nobody likes troubles. Wouldn't we like an easy button? Wouldn't y'all like every time something happened, just boom, gone? I mean, I think everybody'd like an easy button. I would too, but that's not life. And we will never know God unless we have troubles. Never, never, never. We have the privilege that Abraham didn't. We get to see this promise in the Bible. We get to see the fulfillment from the beginning to the end, and then beyond. We get to see the Jesus that God chose Abraham to bring into the world. We get to see the whole fulfillment. Do y'all realize we get to see Abraham's life, God telling him these things, all of it happening? We get to see the birth of the Messiah. We get to see Jesus crucified. We get to see Revelation, where we get to see him come back again. Do y'all understand what we have in this thing right here? It's amazing. Abraham didn't have this stuff. We can read the Bible every day, and we can see everything that a human needs to know about God. If it's not in the Bible, we don't have to know it. But God's given us everything from the beginning to the end. People that don't read the Old Testament miss out on about 75% of what God taught us. And I don't know if y'all remember, I said a couple of Sundays, don't read the Bible to get answers. Read the Bible to get to know God. That's what we need. We need to know who God is, because answers are going to come and go. I need to know my God, and I need to know his character so I feel safe in his care. God tells Abraham all these facts, and then Abraham gets old, just like God said. He dies. He believes God, but he never gets to see the fulfillment. He never gets to go and live in the promised land with all of his descendants. Then we have Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph come. Remember the whole story of Joseph, how he's sold into slavery by his brothers. He goes to Egypt, and it's many, many years later that he's in prison, and Pharaoh has a dream. Nobody can interpret it. Somebody that was in the prison with Joseph remembers that Joseph could interpret dreams. He brings him to Pharaoh. He interprets the dream, and that day, Joseph goes from a prisoner to the second in command in Egypt. Now, who would have ever thought of doing it that way? Who would have ever thought that God would do all this that way? And then he's going to bring the Hebrews, because God told Abraham they're going to be strangers in a land not their own. Did God say Egypt? No, he didn't tell him that many details. He just told him the what. He didn't tell him every little thing about it. He said they're going to be strangers in a land not their own. So through this famine that comes, 7 years of famine, God gets Jacob and all the Hebrews, 70 of them, all the way into Egypt. God said all that was going to happen. He uses world leaders, he uses a famine, and he uses every single thing that just looks like natural and normal things happening in the world to bring all of his people to Egypt, because that's where he said he's going to bring them, and then he's going to bring them out someday. Who could do that? Do y'all think that is mind-blowing? Would any of us in here have chosen it to be that difficult? No. We would choose, again, easy. And if you're going to walk with God, get that thought out of your mind. God's not going to make your life easy. Can I just tell you? He's just not. If you're God's child, you're going to have troubles, and he's going to make sure you have some troubles. If you never have any troubles, check your salvation. Because he means for you to have some things in your life. And he's very good at bringing things into your life to help you to trust him. And it is to help you to trust him. When I have people come talk to me and things happen and they say, I just feel like God's punishing me. I mean, like death of people in their family or whatever. I'm like, God is not punishing you. His wrath was poured out on Jesus Christ. You are God's child. He may discipline you, but it is different than punishment. Punishment and all that wrath, Jesus paid it all. Now he treats us as sons and daughters, and he disciplines us for our good. Hebrews 12 says so that we share in the holiness of God. It is not because he's mad at us and going, oh, just watch this, I'm going to do this and that to you. He does not treat us that way. We are his children. All right, so after they all come into Egypt and they're there, Joseph dies. Another Pharaoh rises to power. He doesn't know about Joseph's story, and he starts to fear the Hebrews. He enslaves them, makes them slaves, just like God said he would, and they grow strong by hard work. And I just thought this was kind of funny. Back in Egyptian times, I bet they thought the healthiest things was to be laying down. Is it lying down or laying down? Is it laying down? No, we're the country. Nobody knows. Ain't nobody around here trying to do no grammar. Okay, he was flat. They think that being flat out. Eating some grapes and being carried around, they probably thought that was the healthiest thing you could do. And he didn't understand when he enslaved the Hebrews and made them do hard labor, they were crossfitting out there. They are... wall balls and all that stuff. So what he was doing is he was oppressing the Hebrews. He was making them strong. They had muscles, and the more he oppressed them, truly, they didn't know about what it would do to our bodies. Hard work is good for our bodies. So they became stronger and stronger. So Pharaoh says, you got to kill all the baby boys. He tells the midwives. The midwives are like, we ain't doing that. So the midwives won't kill the baby boys, and Pharaoh says something to them, and they say the Hebrew women are just vigorous, and they give birth before we get there. They were telling a little fib, but God gives them families of their own. He honors them for what they're doing. And then he tells the parents, he says, when you have a boy, you got to go throw that baby in the Nile. Well, we have somebody named Jochebed. and she's married to Amram. And they are not going to throw their baby into the Nile. She has little Moses, and she sees that he's a fine boy, and she's like, we're not going to fear the king. We're not going to kill this baby. So they keep him in the house for 3 months. At about the first 3 months, Carrie, the babies are pretty quiet, aren't they? What happens after about 3 months? Is it just wild? Anybody, they get loud. They start crying. So what she does, she fixes a little basket, puts pitch on it to make it waterproof, and she puts it in the Nile. And I just love the way God works. She puts it in the Nile. Pharaoh's daughter comes down to bathe in the Nile. Miriam is over in the bushes, and she's going to see what's going to happen to little baby Moses. And while she's looking, Pharaoh's daughter comes down there to bathe, and she sends somebody to get the baby, or to get what's in the basket. She opens it up, and it's a little Hebrew baby. And she's a woman. What's she going to do? She's like, oh, and she looks over, and Miriam runs over like she just happened to be there. Love all these people. No deceit in God's line. She comes over there, and she says, do you want me to find a Hebrew woman to nurse that baby? And she's like, yes, go find somebody, and I'll pay them. And she's like, all right. So she goes, and she gets Moses' mom. And she comes and she says, would you please take this baby for me? And I have a feeling he didn't even miss a feeding, because that's the way our God is. By faith, she would not kill that baby. By faith, she put him in the water. When you act by faith, God picks up and does the rest. Listen, ladies, we don't have to worry when you even putting your child out somewhere, whatever you're doing, when you do it by faith, you have activated your God to start fighting for you. So she pays her to nurse her own baby, and she gets to keep him, so she gets to tell Moses all about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And I believe that I'm going outside of Scripture, so this is an opinion, but I believe she told him, you're the chosen one. I believe he believed that he was the Hebrews' deliverer. I believe he believed that he was going to be a great man over the Hebrews, and that God was going to use him for the deliverance, because these things that were told to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they passed those stories down. And because Joseph's bones are still in Egypt, because Joseph on his dying bed, way before Moses, said, God's coming after us. He said, we're in Egypt right now, but God's made a promise, and he's going to come after us. And when he comes after us, you take my bones and you take them with you to the promised land. So it gives me the chills. It just freaks me out every time. So Moses knew about this, because we're going to see later on, Moses goes and gets Joseph's bones when they go up out of Egypt. So he knows all these stories because he sat on his mama's knee, and he still had a relationship with his mom and with Aaron and with Miriam. So he knows these things, and he's given over to Pharaoh's daughter. And don't you think it's ironic that God is going to use this baby to be one of the greatest men in the whole history of the world? And he's going to use him to write the first 5 books of the Bible. Moses wrote the Pentateuch. I don't know this for sure. I looked to see if I could find it was a fact, so I don't know. But the Hebrews were slaves. I'm not sure they were allowed to learn to read and write, because a lot of times when a nation enslaves a people, they don't want them to be educated, because they can keep them ignorant and enslaved. So I don't know that for sure. But for one thing, God's going to have Moses write the Bible, the first 5 books of the Bible, and he doesn't usually just drop language and how to write things into our head. You have to learn it. So good old Pharaoh's going to get rid of all the little Hebrew boys. He doesn't realize that he's going to educate Moses and raise Moses and give him the best education in the land, because God put Moses in Pharaoh's house. The one that was going to destroy the Hebrews, he puts him in his house, and Moses gets the best education of the time and is raised up in that home to become a great leader by Pharaoh. Just amazes me. So he grew up in Pharaoh's house, but he never forgets who he really is, because we see in Exodus 2:11, one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were, and he watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. So you see who he's identifying with, his own people, because he believes in the God of the Hebrews. And I want you to put yourself back in that time. If you're an Egyptian and they're the richest nation in the world, the most powerful nation in the world, and they worship many gods. You got the Hebrews over here who are slaves. Who does it look like with your eyes is more powerful? The Egyptian gods. So, and God lets this go on like it does. So he goes out there and he knows that they're going to be delivered because he knows the story. So he goes out there, he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. He looks this way and that way. He doesn't see anybody. And good old Moses goes out and kills that Egyptian and hides him in the sand. How many of you all, when you think of Moses, do you think murderer? I mean, you don't, do you? You forget those things, that Moses murdered somebody. And the Hebrew said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us?" So Moses flees. He leaves Egypt because Pharaoh finds out about it, and Pharaoh's going to kill him because he already fears the Hebrews. And when he finds out that Moses is on the Hebrew side, he's going to kill him. So he has to get out of there. He flees to Midian, and Moses doesn't know it, but Pharaoh dies, and the people start to groan and call out to God. And it says in Exodus 2:24 and 25, God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God made that promise hundreds of years ago. It may take God a long time to fulfill a promise to you, but will God always fulfill his promises? He cannot lie. And if he tells you something, he will do it. It's usually just not going to be on our timeline. Does anybody agree with me on that? Because my timeline is promise, 5 minutes later, fulfillment. Is that not your all's? I will wait till the next day with patience, but I would prefer not to wait the entire week. And it's just true, because you get a promise and you're like, oh my God has spoken. 25 years later, as you would feel like on SpongeBob, you're like, I thought he said something. I don't know. I just feel forgotten at this point. I mean, that's just the way. Is that not the way it goes? You do. You start to think, what? Was I crazy? So he looked upon the Israelites and was concerned about them. And I quote this verse all the time, and I hope you guys start to memorize it. Amos 3:7. Surely the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets. And I want you to know, as a child of God, you are a prophet of God at this point, because that's what he did by putting his spirit in us. So when God's going to do something, as you are in tune with God, God doesn't do this for everybody. I want you to understand. He would do it for every child of God. But if you're not seeking God with your whole heart, do not expect to hear from God. I just want everybody to know that. If you're thinking, God, lay it on me, I ain't getting up and meeting with you, and I'm not going to pray and read my Bible, but you lay on me the whole everything, it is not going to happen. You got to seek God with your entire heart. Okay, so he's out in the desert, and all of a sudden, one day he's out there. You know the story. There's a burning bush. And he goes over there and he's like, what is going on? That bush is burning and it's not being consumed. So he goes over there and he hears a voice. Can you imagine? And when he goes over near it, he's like, what is this? And he hears Moses. And I bet he's like, what? I mean, we see this and we're so used to the little cartoons that you do in Sunday school and stuff that I think we forget that that was just a literal man out there going up in the desert to see a real bush and it's burning, and then all of a sudden God's voice comes out of it and says, take off your sandals, you're on holy ground. And I believe it absolutely scared him to death. I know it does, because if you go over to Acts chapter 7, I think it is, it says Moses was terrified. He wouldn't even look to God. His face, he was afraid to show his face. And Moses said to God, he tells him that I want you to go and it's time to deliver my people. And remember, Moses was going to deliver those people. He killed a man and he was going to be the deliverer. And then he goes out into the desert and he's just a nobody. And it's been 40 years. We're not told in the Bible if God said a word to him in those 40 years. What do you think he's probably felt like in 40 years? Don't you feel like he's probably thought, well, God's forgotten about me. I'm not a deliverer. I'm nobody. And at that moment, God comes in a burning bush, because you got to understand, Moses is on God's timeline. God is not on Moses' timeline. He is the deliverer and judge, but he rushed it. And he thought, I'm going to do this myself, and I'm going to deliver them because I'm chosen of God. He went out there and did it. He did it in his own power, and where did it go? But God comes back, because it didn't take away the calling that was on his life. God was not done with him. It just had to be on God's time. So now the timeline has ticked down and God said, I'm ready now. So he goes and calls Moses. And Moses says to God, if I come to the people, he's got tons of excuses now. If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask, what's his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent you. I just love that. I am. Who would think to name themselves I am? Just I am. Nothing. I'm just I am. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers. God's bringing back to their memory. I've taught you remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, people out here who you are so discouraged. He said, I am that God, and it is time, and I have come down to take you up out of this place. Can you imagine? And he said, I'm to be remembered by I am throughout all these generations. God said, I've seen what's happening, I've heard them groaning, and I know they're suffering, and I've come to take them up out of here to that promised land that I promised them. And Moses said, who am I? He's finally in the right posture to be the deliverer because he knows that he is a nobody. God lets him know it's not about who Moses is, it's about who God is, and he is I am. I'm going to tell you a little bit about I am. I got this right here from John Piper. God's name is almost always translated, and I want you to know this. I am is Yahweh. That's the word that every time you hear I am, that is the word God calls himself Yahweh. And it is capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. So anytime you see Lord in all caps, that is Yahweh. I am, the covenant name God has with his people, Israel. So, but the Hebrew word would be pronounced Yahweh, and it's built on the word I am. So every time you hear Yahweh or every time you see Lord in all caps, you should think it's a proper name of God, like you would be called John or Peter or Jane or whatever. That's God's proper name. It's built out of the word I am and reminding us each time that God absolutely is. And I'm going to tell you 10 things about Yahweh. 1, he never had a beginning. God simply is and always was. God will never end. If he did not come into being, he cannot go out of being because he is being all the time. God is absolute reality. There's no reality before him, and there's no reality outside of him unless he wills it and makes it. God is utterly independent. He depends on nothing to bring him into being or support him or counsel him or make him what he is. And I love this part. Everything that is not God is totally dependent on God. Everything. Everything in this planet, every person, every being in the spiritual realm is dependent on God. And the entire universe is utterly secondary. It came into being by God and stays in being moment by moment on God's decision to keep it in being. All the universe is by comparison to God as nothing. All we have and are amazed by in the world and in the galaxies is compared to God, nothing. God is constant. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is not becoming anything. He is who he is, and he cannot be improved. God is the absolute standard of truth and goodness and beauty. God does whatever he pleases, and it is always right, always beautiful, and always in accord with truth. God is the most important and the most valuable reality and person in the universe. He is more worthy of interest and attention and admiration and enjoyment than all other realities. Did y'all hear that last one? Enjoyment. People come to me so often empty and upset and tired, and I'm like, how can you not be enjoying God? God is there like, all I got left is God. All I can do is pray. It's so pitiful. And I'm like, do you hear yourself? You've got God in you to know and to love and to get to know and adore. And I'm just pitiful. God is God. And I try to be nice and go, well, let's talk about that. But I really want to have my eyeballs go out like that and come back in. Yes, I do, truly. So if you say that in my office, know that my eyeballs are trying to bug out. I'm just pretending like they're not. So he is more worthy of interest, attention, admiration, and enjoyment than all other realities, including the entire universe. When you go out and look up at that sky, and I know it hurts your head because it hurts my head. When you look up at that sky and those clouds, and you look up at that night sky and those stars, you know the one who spoke and made it. Can anybody, the weight of that is so huge on me that it truly does hurt me when I look up, because I cannot fathom who that God is and how he could do that. It is big to me. It is weighty. And there is a weight to God's glory, and you feel it. If you have any kind of sense of God, you feel the weightiness of who he is as you look at all he's made. And I want to tell you another little factoid about Yahweh. Yahweh, we put vowels in that. In the Hebrew, there are no vowels, so it's YWHW. That's all it is YWHW. And Hebrew has characters, like Chinese language has characters, so each character has a meaning. So when you see the Y, it's a yod, is what it's called. And you see the H, it's called a hey. And the W is called a vav, I think is what it is. So the Hebrew's letters of YWHW, if you were to say them, it would be Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. That's my Hebrew for the day. And Yod, listen to this, what it means. Yod, that W, is an ancient, the Yod symbol is an anciently portrayed as the symbol of a hand. Okay, so the Y is the symbol of a hand in Hebrew. The Hey means behold, or to show, or to reveal. And the Vav, which is actually the W, signifies a nail, a peg, or a hook. And this is important. So they're pronounced in Hebrew. Yahweh is Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. When you read them in the Hebrew manner from right to left, the 4 letters in God's name in Hebrew have the following meaning: behold, nail, closed hand. When you read it in English from left to right, Yahweh means behold the nail, behold the hand. Isn't that something? It actually means behold the nailed hand. And that is God's name. You cannot tell me that is by accident. Andrew Fink sent that to me on Sunday about Yahweh, and that it means behold the hand, behold the nail. And he had no idea that I was going to teach on the name of Yahweh. Is that the coolest thing? So he says to Moses, go gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, again, the God of your fathers has appeared to me, and I've observed what has been done to you, and I promise I'm going to bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites. And God says they're going to listen to your voice. You and the elders of Israel go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us go into a 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know, listen to what God says. To me, this is kind of funny. God says, I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So he says, I'm going to send you to him. But what is he telling him there? He's not going to let you go. I'm going to have to compel him with my hand, but I want you to go. Again, this comes back to you do the natural. He can't make him do anything. All he can do is obey God and go tell him. God says, you go obey me. I'll take my hand. And I like to think of it this way. Like he took Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's like, I ain't letting him go. And I think God just took his arm, starts taking it up behind his back, and starts just pulling it up, because he becomes God's problem at that point. And he says, I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. And after that, he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and you won't go out empty. But the women will ask their neighbor for clothing and jewelry, and he said they're going to give it to you, and you will plunder the Egyptians. So he tells them 6 things. Pharaoh won't listen. My mighty hand will have to move him. I'm going to strike Egypt. After that, he'll let you go. I'm going to give you favor in their sight, and you will plunder them. God's letting them know that deliverance is going to be complete. And I want you to hear these things, guys. The story of the Israelites and Moses is a story of us individually, because we are full of unbelief just like they were. And we don't want to die in the desert. We want to get to our promised land wherever God has that for us. He's letting them know that deliverance is going to be complete. This is not just about giving God's people what they crave. It's about God being seen as God Almighty to the world and Yahweh to his covenant people. He's taking slaves and making them fearless world changers and attempting to show the world who he really is through the most powerful nation and the most powerful man on the planet. He was making Israel a city on a hill, a place to show the glory of the living God to an idol-worshiping world. Remember when he took Daniel to Babylon and used Nebuchadnezzar and made him go crazy for a little while and all that? God took the most powerful man on the planet and made him come to the place where he said, the Lord is God. He's doing the same thing with Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the most powerful man on the planet, and God's going to let him know he is nothing compared to him. Because listen to this. When you look at Joshua 2, and don't turn there, but 40 years after this happened, after the parting of the Red Sea, we see, when I said God wanted the whole world to know who he was, you got to realize stuff that happened out in that desert, everybody found out about it. Because when they get to Jericho and those spies go in, Rahab said, and this is 40 years later, she said, we've heard about how your God parted the Red Sea and dried it up for you. And she said, our hearts are melting within us and we are shaken with fear because we've heard that the Lord your God is the Lord of heaven and earth. So that's a pretty powerful thing. So we're going to start to see the deliverance next week, but it's going to get much worse before it gets better. The elders and Moses are going to march in to see Pharaoh, but he's not going to listen. God said he wouldn't. And when deliverance is not immediate, this is where it's going to get personal, ladies. When deliverance is not immediate and painless, the people are going to stop listening to Moses because of their discouragement and harsh labor. We're so much like this. As God saves us, because Israel was chosen, they were God's people, they were already his. But he says, now I'm going to take you out of bondage. When God saves us, then he starts taking us out of bondage that we've been in all of our lives. That's where it gets painful, and that's where it gets real. And it sometimes it gets pretty horrible. But he is going to walk us through all of our junk, all of our fears, all the places we've closed off to him, all of our wrong ideas about him, and the false gods that we bow down to. He's going to bring judgment on the things we lean on and show us that he is God over all the earth, and he is also our personal God and Father. He is I am. And I want you to think about this. He is I am, meaning I am whatever you need. We are needy. He's saying, I am your father, and I am your mother, and I am your husband. I used to get up in the morning before my children would get out of bed, and I would open up my Bible and I would say, God, be a wife through me today. God, be a mom through me today. God is everything I need. He created male and female in his image, so he is a great mother and he is a great father. He says, I am the fulfillment of everything you crave. I am your peace. I am your comfort. I am your conqueror. I am your overcomer. I could go on, but I am. That's who he is. Who else could be called I am? And then you fill in the blank. But God, he's so intimate, and we crave that intimacy. We fear it. We crave intimacy with him, and we fear intimacy with him. What we want to say is, God, just deliver me. Let's not worry about how I got here. Just get me out of it. Don't take me in any of my fears. Just get me where I want to go and give me a great life. But to give us less than himself would be the worst thing God could ever do. To give us the promised land without his presence would be empty and vain, and we were created for so much more than that. Pain and misery makes us desperate and discouraged. Am I right? When you're under pain and misery, do you get desperate and discouraged? God's finger of his mighty hand is always on the pulse of your life. Whether you realize it or not, he always is taking your pulse. Nothing escapes him, and nothing is done to us that is unknown. The Lord said, I've seen their misery, I've heard them crying, and I am concerned about their suffering. Do you think they felt like he was concerned about their suffering when they were in the middle of it, when they were crying out in their misery? Do you think they felt like he had his finger on every little thing that was happening? I'm sure they did not feel like that. So let's not let the future and our hopes for that place, whatever we consider that place of arrival to be, take the joy of seeing God do his thing in our lives today, right now, where we are. How many of us at times are just trying to hunker down and get through the moment instead of looking at the day as a gift from God. Do we want deliverance from circumstances or deliverance from our wrong beliefs about God and life? If God just delivers us from our circumstances, I promise you, you will never know real deliverance. Because every time something else comes up in your life, you will want relief, not God. He's trying to get you and me to a place of power, which is faith, that believes that God is holy love, no matter what happens in your life. And that cannot be done in a moment. It will be done with a lot of time in God's presence. God delivered them with a mighty hand, and it was only a foretaste of the one Moses said about, God will raise up a prophet like me, listen to him. Do y'all know that Moses said that about Jesus? He said, God is going to raise up a prophet like me from among you one day, and you need to listen to him. God is the same. He cannot change, and the mighty hand in the Old Testament is the nail-pierced hand in the New Testament. This book is the most mind-blowing book on the planet. There's nothing like it other than the one who wrote it. Get in it and be a world changer. You can come on up, Carrie. And I want to tell you something. He came to set them free from slavery, and we are all slaves unless we're walking with God, every single one of us. And he came to set us free. What does Scripture say? It says, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And Isaiah 61 says, he has sent me, and this is Jesus. He said he sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and release from darkness for the prisoners. Our freedom and God fighting for us as we walk this earth will make people's heart melt with fear. Just as Rahab said, when I talk to people, when I look at my own life, there's nobody on this earth I can change. Nobody. People want to change their spouses. They want to change their children. They want to change the way people at work look at them and the way people judge them. And I tell people there is nobody you can change on this entire planet. But if each one of us will take the time to get alone with our God and let him do what he wants in our lives, people will know that God has come into the room when we walk into the room, because there is a humility and a kindness and a power in his presence that is undeniable. And I believe, as Rahab said, she said, our hearts are melting with fear because we've heard about your God. I believe God does that in you and in me. When we have the presence of God in our life, we don't have to worry about other people. The only thing we've got to stay focused on is I've got to get to God. I've got to get to God. Everybody in here has problems, but really the only problem any of us have is a lack of intimacy with God. Because when I'm connected to that ultimate reality, which is God, God has no problems. God truly is not up there wringing his hands. I have to get calmed down, go in there and get before my God, and God will always make a way. Always. Let's pray.